the News Channel 5 network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here. We've got a good show on tap for you on this Tuesday. You recall, last week we had some guests on talking about the issue of guns, gun control, efforts to try to keep the guns out of the hands of people that shouldn't have them. And they had a definite point of view on that. We have someone else with a different point of view, and we say, we're going to give an entire show to everyone to talk about it. And with me this morning is John Harris with the Tennessee Firearms Association. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
True that you have a different take on things? Well, you're wondering what take was it last week?
Correct take.
What is the correct take? Of course you do. Everyone's got the correct take. But, this is an important issue that we keep bringing up and talking about and looking at what we're going to do, say, in Tennessee or nationally. I think everyone's in agreement, John, that they'd like to do whatever they can to protect the Second Amendment and the right that people have to own weapons, but to keep weapons out of the hands of people that are going to do bad with them. How do you do that?
Well, the problem with that goal and objective is identifying who's in that class of people.
Right.
And then what type of, within the limits of the Constitution, safeguards can you put in place to try to prohibit those people, once you've identified them, from getting access not just to guns, but to knives, to cars, to any other item that they could cause harm with. Mm-hmm. And the problem is so many on the left want to focus on the gun, mm-hmm. when the real focus needs to be on that class of people and what is it that increases the size of the class, that decreases the size, what makes them the risk, and how do we deal with that problem, either the mental health or the social skills that class of people has that makes them more likely to commit harm.
All right, now we talk about red flag laws, yes, and how those will play out, and keeping, finding ways to flag someone. Now, so the point being here is red flags, I know some people who are gun rights advocates don't like that idea, but if you had red flag laws that applied to, as you just said, anyone that could potentially be dangerous, not just guns, but it's not focused on the guns, but more on the individual. Say, this is a crackpot that, obviously you shouldn't have access to bombs, guns, knives, or things like this. So would you feel more comfortable with addressing red flag laws if it was more broad that way?
Well, red flag laws are sort of a euphemism for what's really called extreme risk protection orders. Okay. And the concept is, with that approach, is that there are certain individuals in society who create such an extreme risk that we need to do something to protect from society from the possibility or the potential that they might go out and commit a crime at some point in the future.
And that's really tough, because I have a problem with, trying to punish someone for something they might do.
Well, that is the problem.
And you have to be real careful with it. That can be a slippery slope too. But I guess you would have to have some basis for what that red flag is. If they've had to have some kind of mental health treatment, or if they've had some incidents, maybe not to the criminal level, right? Well, where you're hinted that, there's something not quite right about this individual who may need help.
And we already have in Tennessee, and most states already have laws that deal with that individual that's a risk. Mm-hmm. In Tennessee, they're called emergency and voluntary committals. And in Tennessee, under current law, it requires that two physicians examine and certify that the person is an imminent threat of risk of harm to themselves or a third person. And if that occurs, then a judge can sign an order that involuntarily confines the person for up to 2 weeks to evaluate them. But it takes the person off the street, not some item that could be easily replaced or substituted. There are states like, I think Connecticut, which have had these extreme risk protection orders for a number of years, and they've tried to put those safeguards in place. And part of the problem has been that in Connecticut, for example, their system requires that at least two police officers independently investigate the facts before they seize the weapons. Now, they don't do anything about getting the person off the street. Mm-hmm. They seize the weapons. And what they found out, and they've had this law for 10 years or more, is that even with those protections in place, once a court hears all sides of the story, the court has found that about a third of the cases they wrongfully seize the person's assets. And so that's the concern with these extreme risk orders that the left and others want to pursue, is they so easily infringe the rights of citizens or label them an extreme risk without adequate due process protections to make sure that their individuals' rights are protected. And if they're really dangerous, we've already got laws to deal with that.
Okay, and I see why. That's got to be looked at carefully. Now, the other issue, and we'll get phone calls in our second segment. I know a lot of people have strong opinions on it. We touched on this last week when we did a similar show. Is there any type of weaponry in your mind that maybe should have some limits placed on it? You hear some saying, well, honestly, do we have to have such free access to, say, AK-47s or some of these other weapons that sometimes we do see used in some of these mass shootings? And I know any gun can kill you, but there have been some that were legally purchased that then are used to take out a bunch of people in a hurry at a school or a movie theater or something like that. And people are like, well, all right, could there be some limits placed on access to these guns? And is it that important that people have access to that?
Well, the answer is, if you understand why we have the Second Amendment, then in the absence of a constitutional amendment changing the purpose and function of the Second Amendment, you can't really do that.
And you're talking about the purpose is that we need AK-47s to protect us against the government when they come to get us, which truly is absurd because they're just going to send a Harrier and you have no chance anyway. You're dead. Okay?
Well,
so don't try to sell. I know there's people out there going to say, well, I need the gun to protect myself for, at some point when the government or we have an invasion. Boy, if I have to count on you for that, I'm worried already.
That's the practical argument. But keep in mind,
there's got to be more to it than that, because that one, and I'm open-minded about that, I just don't buy that. I'm sorry. That some guy out in the country needs to have his AK-47 to protect himself from the government. Ain't buying it. Sorry. It's got to be something more than that.
Well, the fact is that our founders, as a small nation, took on the largest army in the world with basically the weapons that they owned. And defeated them. And as a result of that, we have this country today. And the Second Amendment came into existence at that time for the purposes of saying, just like the First Amendment, that the Second Amendment is protecting a political right of the citizens as a mass and as individuals within the mass to own categories of weapons that are suitable for military purposes.
Boy, things sure have changed from back then. I understand what you're saying. That would not happen now. It couldn't. I'm saying,
well,
and you know as well as I do.
Yeah.
You don't have access to a Harrier. You don't have access to smart bombs or Patriot missiles. You're done. The citizen ain't going to be able to do it. Okay? It's just not going to happen. That's a dream world.
That's not necessarily a dream world when you look at the mass of people that exist. And like I said, when we started,
armed and an upright, I'm not saying there can't be a revolution perhaps to some degree, but it's
not an individual level.
If you have a government and the force of the military coming down on us, which God forbid anything like that ever happen here in this country, our own military, boy, I mean, I don't even want to imagine something like that. But I mean, that to me, okay, if that's the only argument, that just doesn't wash, man.
It does. It does, because like I said, you've got to go back and change the Second Amendment. If you want to pass laws to accomplish...
When they wrote that, they had no idea an AK-47 would ever exist.
Well, they knew then when they wrote it that what they were protecting was the right of the individual citizen.
I understand that.
And the United States Department of Justice has said that.
But there are limits on certain weapons we can't have. I mean, if that's so true, then, I should be able to go out and get anything. And you know as well as I do, there's certain things, maybe with a special permit I can get, but in certain things are made a little more difficult because they're thinking the average Joe doesn't need to have a bazooka.
There are some things that are more difficult, but they're only more difficult because there's a revenue tax attached to them. If you wanted a bazooka...
just make it more difficult to get.
If you wanted a bazooka under current law, and law that's been in existence since 1934, you can get it. You have to pay a $200 tax to acquire it.
Which makes it more difficult.
It's a one-page form and a $200 tax. It really isn't hard to get.
All right, but
the bigger issue is, can you afford it?
Right, and a lot of people maybe 200. Yeah, that's expensive. How much is a bazooka, you think?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have one yet.
What do you think a new one would cost? Great. I wonder. It's probably not a cheap weapon. I mean, that's for sure. Well, listen, we'll take a break. We've got some calls coming in, and that's the discussion. Your take on some of this, and his opinions and thoughts on what can be done. Because I think we're all in agreement. We want to try to bring an end to, as best we can, some of these mass shootings, and to make it a safer place for all of us, while we still maintain the ability to own weapons legally and protect ourselves, or just enjoy target practice or collecting like you do.
That's right.
So let's take a break. We'll be back with some of your calls and your thoughts and more with John Harris of the Tennessee Firearms Association right after this.